In 1995, I was a 9-year-old kid. I was walking with my mom from store to store. Excuse me, boxes? That's one of the few words that I knew how to say in English. We wanted to find any empty boxes that people may have because we needed them to pack our things and ship them from our home in Queens, New York to Chicago. This was all the result of my parents separating a few weeks before when my dad left the house. Now, all the pressure was on my 32-year-old mother who had to make tough decisions and think about our future. In Chicago, we had a lot of relatives. In New York, we only had one who lived very far from us. Our family in Chicago wanted us to come live with them because we would have the support of a lot of people rather than staying in New York by ourselves. My parents had been in New York for 3 years after moving there from Ecuador. Once they were established, they flew me from Ecuador, where I had stayed behind with my grandmother. For 2 years, she had taken care of me while I awaited the day that I could be with my parents. All I knew was that I was going to New York to live with them. Never did I imagine that it would only end up being temporary. I had not even been with them for a year when all of this started happening. I was still learning English, and my mom didn't really know it. On the day of the flight, we took a cab to the airport. We had our one-way tickets to Chicago. Once at the airport, that winter afternoon, we boarded the plane and prepared for takeoff. Our relatives in Chicago had our flight info and they would be awaiting for our arrival. Sometime later, we looked out the small plane windows. The sky had darkened, but we could see tiny little lights in the distance. And we knew we were arriving when the plane started to descend. In a few minutes, we would be with our family. We exited quickly following the other passengers to the baggage area. One by one, the other travelers grabbed their bags from the baggage carousel and left while we waited and waited for our bags. After waiting long enough, we decided to start walking, looking for someone who can help us find them. But then we noticed something that would make it more difficult. There was no Spanish-speaking people in sight. More minutes went by and we thought about our family who were probably by now wondering, why are they taking so long? We continued searching for someone, but no luck. By now we had roamed to a different area of the airport, but we didn't know where because all the signs were in English. Then we spotted a payphone. My mom decided to call the house of our relatives, hoping that one of them stayed behind and we could call them and tell them that we are still in the airport. After depositing change and dialing the number, my mom's face filled with confusion. The call was not going through. Instead, we were getting an operator message in English. We tried over and over, but got the same message. By now, I was wondering, why can't we find our bags? Why can't we find anyone to help us? We are lost in the airport and we can't get a hold of our relatives. We continued walking and not one soul among the crowds of fast-moving people looked to be Hispanic. By now, we had exited the plane at least 2 hours ago and we were tired and hungry. My worry was that our family might have gotten tired of waiting for us and left. All of a sudden, it was like we struck gold. My mom saw a brown-skinned family. They were at the bottom of the stairs. Maybe they can help us, she said as we ran down the flight of steps, because that could be our only chance. After we caught up to them, my mom started explaining the situation. They were a couple with 2 kids. They had just landed and were on their way out. They were the Lopez family. After my mom finished explaining the situation, the husband, with a very concerned look on his face, says, "Pero aquí no es Chicago. Aquí es Columbus, Ohio." I never heard the name before. We didn't know where that was. I don't think my mom knew either. Where was this foreign land that he spoke of? After a moment of stunned silence, my mom looked at me, looked back at them and said, "No es posible. Teníamos que estar en Chicago." The Lopez family did speak English, so they accompanied us to the service desk and translated our story to the airlines. Well, it turns out that our flight was a one-stop, but we didn't know. Surely they had to have announced that we just landed in Columbus, Ohio, but of course we didn't understand and got off thinking that we had reached our destination. That explains the missing luggage. That explains the calls not going through because it wasn't a local number. The airlines did offer to fly us to Chicago, but they couldn't do it until the next morning. The Lopez said they lived 30 minutes away from the airport. They offered to let us spend the night at their house and they could drive us back to the airport the following morning. My mom gratefully accepted. Once at their house, we called our relatives in Chicago. As expected, they had been so worried about us. We gave them the new flight number, but this time we had verified that it was a non-stop. The Lopez gave us food and a very comfortable place to spend the night. The next morning, as promised, they transported us to the airport. A few anxious hours later, we touched down, exited the plane quickly, and once we got to the arrivals, immediately saw our relatives. Okay, I thought, this has to be Chicago. I let out a sigh of relief as we ran towards them because now we were with our family surrounded by all their love and support. And thanks to the Lopez, willing to be so kind to us, strangers, we were never really alone after all.